Moderator, Commissioner, and friends, my name is Joan Masterton from Oak Ridges Presbytery, and I serve at St. James Presbyterian Church in Stouffville. However, in an alternate universe and in the previous millennium, I worked for 30 years in the research directorate of the Atmospheric Environment Service studying changing climate and the international transmission of pollutants through the atmosphere. So it is my special pleasure today to be here and to introduce to you this year's recipient of the Cutting Edge of Mission Award, Dr. Sheila Watt-Cloutier. Dr. Watt-Cloutier is an internationally recognized environmental, cultural, and human rights activist and has been such for most of her life. She was born in what is now called Cujuac in the region of Nunavik in northern Quebec and spent the first decade of her life with family living traditionally, nourished by country food, and loved by the strong women in her life, her mother and her grandmother. Starting at the age of 10, she was sent to schools in southern Canada for her education, including, in later years, studying counseling, education, human development through McGill University. In 1995, Dr. Watt-Cloutier became Canadian president of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, representing the interests of Inuit in Russia, Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. She spoke on behalf of Arctic Indigenous peoples during the negotiation of the Stockholm Convention on behalf of Arctic Indigenous peoples during the negotiation of that convention that banned the manufacture and use of persistent organic pollutants, including PCBs and DDT, pollutants that had entered the Arctic food chain and accumulated in the bodies of the Inuit people. In 2002, she was elected the international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and her work then began to focus on climate change, the science for which was gathered and published in the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment. This assessment paralleled the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but provided a much more detailed information on the Arctic region, the so-called canary in the coal mine for global climate change impacts. One of the key findings of the assessment was a projection that the Inuit hunting culture, dating back thousands of years, would not survive the loss of sea ice and other projected changes. Building a supportive cohort of allies, she launched the world's first international legal action on climate change, alleging that unchecked emissions of greenhouse gases had violated Inuit cultural and environmental human rights. Dr. Watt-Cloutier's life has been guided by the needs of her people, of Inuit people, both in Canada and in other circumpolar nations, and their foremost need has been to be heard and to be recognized. She reminds us all that the Arctic has been home to Indigenous peoples for millennia. It is not empty. Ice is a life force that allows Inuit to not only survive, but thrive. Hence the name of her recent book, The Right to be Cold. Responding to the need for Inuit to be made visible and respected, she exercised the politics of influence rather than the politics of protest. Finding herself an introvert in an extrovert's job, she nevertheless persevered and brought a human face to the impacts of global air pollution and climate change occurring in the Arctic. As well, she communicated science and politics back to the people of the North, helping them to understand and better respond to complex scientific, social, and economic issues that threatened the well-being of Arctic dwellers. Dr. Watt-Cloutier is an officer of the Order of Canada, has been awarded 20 honorary doctorates from universities, was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and received the Champions of the Earth Award from the United Nations Environmental Program. She has received many other international awards and honors as well, but she remembers most fondly the days of her youth when her grandmother would read Bible stories to her. She learned to read and write Inuktitut from her grandmother's cherished hymn book, which was written in Inuktitut syllabics or symbols. Stretched to her limits in challenging circumstances over the years, Dr. Watt-Cloutier relied on prayer to get her through the toughest of times, believing that God is very precise and provides signs that allow us to see that our personal experiences and our interpretation of them can have great meaning in the larger scheme of our life's journey, both the outward physical journey and the inward spiritual journey. Please join with me in welcoming Dr. Sheila Watt-Cloutier, the 2019 recipient of the Cutting Edge of Mission Award.
Takkanito ikarwaqtilagu oqausiganik atulaqtusungumigama nakomik ilunasi. In my language, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional lands, the territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples. And thank you, moderator. And thank you to Glennis Williams of International Ministries and to Anne-Marie Klassen, head of the Cutting Edge of Mission Committee, and all of the committee members who have brought me here and thought that perhaps I would be the next recipient of this remarkable acknowledgement of my life's work. So thank you for having me here. Indeed, I started my life very humbly in that little community. At the time was called Fort Chima. It was an old Hudson's Bay Company post where I traveled only by dog team the first 10 years of my life and didn't start to learn any English at all till I was the age of 6. And so that's my humble beginnings, raised by my grandmother and my mother. In those days, the white fathers didn't stay. And so here I am in the world trying to make a difference from the very foundation that I was given, and feeling very blessed by the meaningful work that has found its way to me. And today is still another quite remarkable time. Yes, I understand that I have been decorated for a lot of this work, and I'm very humbled by it, there's no doubt. But I never see it so much as me, the personality, receiving all of these accolades, but more about people getting it in terms of the message and resonating with the work that I have been doing for a long time. But you know, very few people know about the Arctic and its people. And in fact, more people know about the wildlife of the Arctic than its people. And so for me, the work that I have been doing for the last 15, 20 years has to put a human face to the issue. And now more importantly, with climate change, humanize the issue of climate change, where most people tend to understand this issue as a political issue, as an economic issue, a scientific issue, an academic issue. But in reality for us, of course, it's a human issue. And when I started that work back when I was elected with the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the same was true for the issues of toxins in our food chain and the nursing milk of our mothers in higher levels than anywhere else in the world as a result of toxins making their way into our bodies and the nursing milk. And for me, the daunting task was to try to get all of these countries at the UN level to address this, not just as a chemical story, but as one of human health for the Inuit of the Arctic. And so the women, the mothers of the world, were carrying the brunt of the way in which we do business in this world. And to say that it should not be the mothers of the world, the Inuit carrying the net recipients of these toxins as a result of mothers in Africa, for example, who were trying to spare the death of their babies from malaria by using DDT. And so I kept saying, and we always said in our negotiations, what a world we have created when mothers of the world have to carry the burden of all of these things that are happening to the health of people. And so again, climate change is huge. It's big, more challenging, in fact, and daunting. But because of that experience that I had in negotiating to help negotiate that UN treaty that became the Stockholm Convention, it convinced me that the world can do the right thing. And so we moved ahead and started to work very diligently on the issues of climate change and really humanizing it, not just in terms of putting the human face, but making it a human rights issue. One has to remember that as Inuit, we are reliant upon, dependent upon the ice, the snow, and the cold for our way of life. For us, the ice and the snow is our transportation and our mobility. And as soon as that starts to go, it becomes an issue of safety and security right away. And we are losing over the past decade, in particular, more and more of our hunters through the thinning ice in the Arctic as a result of the warming that's happening to our planet. And so we have to understand that the Arctic is a very key place in this world, and that what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. And in fact, the Arctic is the cooling system. It is the air conditioner for the planet. It is breaking down. And as a result of that, it's impacting on the ocean currents, and oceans are the drivers of climate change. And so it impacts on everything. So whatever is happening in the world today is triggered by the melting of the Arctic's ice. And in particular, with the Greenland ice sheet that is on land, it is creating a sea level rise in many other parts of the world. And so you can't get clearer than that in terms of understanding just how connected and interconnected our world is as one. But also the fact that Inuit culture is an important culture to maintain. It isn't just about the harvesting of animals, although that's a very big part of who we are, because that's our organic farms out there in the supermarket, which is the environment that we go out and get our wonderful, nutritious food that not only gives us nutrition, but it also gives us the connection to source on so many levels. It isn't just about the nutritional value of it, but what it gives us spiritually, emotionally, culturally, all of those things. Because as you're out there hunting, of course, the technical aspect of it is really important to learn for our younger generation in terms of what they gain from that. The technical aspect of becoming a natural conservationist and a proficient provider for your families. And that's really important, those technical aspects, to become that great harvester, to bring home this wonderful food to your family every day. But it's also the character and life-building skills that are required for you to not only survive, but to be able to thrive as an individual. And what I mean by that is that when you're out there waiting for that snow to fall and the ice to form and the winds to die and the animals to surface, you are learning patience. You are learning about yourself. And so you learn to become courageous at the right time. You take the right survival-based risks to be able to become confident as a provider for your family. You learn how to deal with stressful situations, to be bold under pressure, to how not to be impulsive. And one of the things that we're learning, because we are dealing with the highest suicide rates in North America, and what we're learning is that impulsivity is one of those issues that we're dealing with when it comes to suicides. And so, but if you've learned on the land and the nature and how nature is a natural teacher, how not to be impulsive, and that by being impulsive, you are putting yourself and your others at risk around you. That if you've had that integrated from the natural way of teaching, you are more apt to be able to deal with the modern stressors that come your way. And so those connections are really important. The courageous way, developing your confidence and the self-worth in the history of historical traumas that we're dealing with, and the colonialistic histories that we're dealing with, we have to have that kind of strengthening back in our lives. And so our land and what we have, we lose that sound judgment and wisdom. So it's not just the ice that we're losing, it is the wisdom that we lose with it, with what's happening with our climate. And so these are the pieces that we need to understand better about how, in a world that is changing very rapidly, as I said earlier, imagine going from dog team at my age in one lifetime to what we are living with today, where most societies have taken perhaps 350 years to adjust and to adapt to a modern setting that we're living in today. And so the speed in which things have happened, yes, have certainly contributed to the problems that we're facing at the social and health levels in our communities, but certainly it's about all that's happening now as well. And so as we try to prepare our children for the opportunities and challenges of life, we are dealing with all of those changes, the historical traumas. And now as we reach out and realize and recognize the answers lie within us, it lies within our culture, it lies within the incredible ingenuity of a culture that has built a hayak, which is the boat that is replicated worldwide. We are not just victims to globalization, but we are a people who have contributed. We are a people who can build a home of snow, warm enough for your babies to be in and your mothers to birth in. This is ingenuity at its best, and our culture has much to offer. But as we come to that realization that Inuit culture is a remarkable culture to be protected, we realize that the next wave of tumultuous change is upon us. And so the very thing that we're turning to is starting to become precarious and adding more stress to an already very vulnerable situation. So I'm not here to just paint a dark and gloomy picture, because there's some remarkable things that are starting to happen in our world. But it's to give you the indication that we, as all Canadians and all common humanity, have a sense of responsibility to what's happening to the Arctic's ice, and to move in a direction that better understands one another and not other one another, and to really just get those voices out there in terms of understanding these pieces of how important about what's happening in the Arctic is reflecting on what's happening in the southern parts of the world now. What I say consider south, anything beyond a few hundred miles south is south to us. Montreal is south, Ottawa is south, Toronto is south. And so we need to address these issues in a way that is not just politicizing the issue, because I think the movement is not necessarily going to be in politics. Politics has its own culture, its own way, and it's very slow to take action because of the nature of politics and the elections, and how oftentimes the leaders have really good intentions to be able to make those promises, to make real change at that level in our communities. However, when push comes to shove, there's an awful lot of compromising that has to get done. So for me, the talks that I give across this country, I always try to speak to everybody as though we were all in it together, not just the politicians to lead, but for all of us to lead on these issues that binds us together, the common humanity that we are. And so it's been a daunting task to try to get that on the map. As I say, the world knows the wildlife better than the people itself. And there seems to be this disconnect that often happens about, the inhospitable Arctic that's always so cold and dark. How can you possibly live up there? Without really fully knowing just the warmth and the hospitality that exist in our communities, and the remarkable culture that lives there, and is trying our best to make it for our children and our grandchildren. And so the social and health challenges that we face, as I say, there is a historical context to it. And in writing the book that I did, I really wanted to have the younger generation understand better that context. It's been very difficult for our generation, the younger generation, to be taking on the historical traumas and the unresolved historical traumas of the colonialistic past of our own country here. And I wanted the younger generation to try to understand these pieces better so that they can perhaps lessen a little bit of that load, that burden that they carry with what's happened, with the violence and the abuses and the addictions that exist in our Aboriginal communities of this country. And also to try to educate the world on what has been happening through that process. And so I wrote the book on several levels in that way, through as a memoir on the life that I have led and the feelings that I have had in terms of how to overcome some obstacles in my life, and that is through the spiritual journey that I have been on since I was about in my mid-30s. And that has been the most helpful thing for me, is to realize that we are not just form, that we are spirit really in action as we moved forward to the missions that we are here for. And so it's been quite the journey. And so in writing the book, I stole the line from Maya Angelou or I steal it time to time, or I use it or borrow it is maybe a better word, to say that, most people have come to know my glory because of the recognition that I've received over the world, which I'm very honored by. But certainly they have come to know my glory, but not my story. And it was important for me to share it in a way that would, again, try to connect us all, no matter who you are, because we're all in it together. We've all had challenges in life. We all have struggles. There are always going to be obstacles, but there are ways in which we can overcome them. And so the connections that are made to me are really important. And just 3 days ago, I was in Paris, France, doing a book launch as part of a large music festival that was happening there in Paris, because my book has now been translated into French. And I'm from Quebec, so I was proud to say, yes, that's great that it's now in French. And then Paris invited me for this huge launch at a music festival. And and it was a very nice setting, in a tent outside where people would come and go and sit down and listen. And they had already been forewarned that I was coming, because I've ended up in the Le Monde, the big newspaper there, saying that I was coming to do this. And so people were coming in and out. And that's something that I can pretty much handle in terms of, because as the introduction was said, that I'm an introvert doing extrovert work. So it takes a lot for me to get up into crowds and do that. But you can do it. There's when you have a kind of a personal mission in life, or a personal project, as Susan Cain calls it in her book called Quiet. This is a plug for introverts here. She says you can do anything, and then that's great. So I do this, but here I was, and that was the crowd that I was able to be in my kind of my own Zen mode and zone, to be able to talk to the crowds. And then somebody came up to me and said, this is a huge music festival that's going on here. There's a lot of young people, and we're asking some speakers if they could come to some of the opening of some of the concerts that are here on this site, where there's a huge crowds of young people that are going to be here. And would you be willing to do a 3-minute call to action on climate change just before this big concert? And it's a techno concert that was going to happen. Okay. So I thought, okay, well, for me, again, it's about connecting, and so off I went, and I was, escorted off to the beginning of this concert, and going up the steps of this, or this kind of a platform that leads you up to the stage. And I'm thinking, okay, here we go. And, and I didn't realize until I got out there that there were literally thousands, of young people that were very psyched up and geared to listen to their techno concert. And I thought, okay, how is this energy going to match? And how is it going to connect? And so but it became a moment. I seized the moment. I went out there. I was introduced and I went out there and I seized the moment with the mic. And it just became one of those powerful moments that I had not anticipated or expected, because it was about the open-heartedness of the connection that was happening there in that very moment. And I thought, are they going to even understand me because I'm speaking English and they're French? But yes, they understood, they got the message, they cheered it, they embraced it. And in 3 minutes, we were in this exhilarated place that I had not anticipated would be happening. And so you can never assume, that you're in the wrong audience, or that you're in a different way of seeing things in life. That the bottom line is we're all connected spiritually. We're all there. And that we need to keep addressing these issues from that human perspective, from the spiritual perspective, that what is really needed in change in this world to address these monumental issues that we're faced with is a change in our attitudes towards each other, a change in the attitudes towards, othering one another, and to embrace and understand that the indigenous peoples of the world, including Inuit of the Arctic, have had one heck of a history. And that's why we struggle the way that we do. It's not because we're weak, and it's not because we don't have the ability to adapt to a modern setting, which many people tend to think that's the case. It couldn't be further from the truth. We are an extremely adaptable people, which is why we have survived a millennia in the harshest environments in the world. And so it's to bring back that human aspect to these issues, which again, I say, are often so politicized, and that we fight over it. And because it is that connection that we have lost to one another, it is that connection we've lost to our food source, it is that connection we've lost to our environment, that we are even debating this issue of climate change in the first place. And so for me, to be here in this quiet audience, different from Sunday's event, but yet so similar in terms of the connections that are made, and to the connections that I made even before coming here with Anne-Marie Klassen and others, is an honor for me to be here with all of you today and to be receiving this. So thank you, Nakormik, and until we meet again. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Watt-Cloutier, or may I say Sheila? Yes. Sheila, thank you so much for coming to be with us and to receive this award. I know that you've received a lot of awards and a lot of honors for the work that you have done, because it has been your life's work which has made a huge impact on our world, on people. I read your book. I was inspired by your book in many, many ways. And I think because I recognize that this was your life's work. When we give ourselves in mission, we give ourselves very fully. And you told your story in such a personal way, and you shared your heart all the way through it. Every time you said, and this happened, and then I wept. And you continued on. You took rest when you needed, and then you kept going for the sake of your grandchildren and your community and all of us and our world and all its peoples. I learned a great deal about the Inuit people and your culture, and I learned a lot about climate change and the human impact of climate change. And I'm grateful for your work, and I hope that everyone will read the book, The Right to Be Cold. On behalf of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, I present you with the Cutting Edge of Mission Award for 2019. That's a gift from the Assembly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Would you remind them that the recipient after this speaker?
At the close of this sederant, there is also a reception for the cutting edge of mission at the Veritas Cafe. And Victoria's going to speak. Excellent. Thanks.
Dr. Sheila Watt-Cloutier. On behalf of this General Assembly, it is an honor to thank you for being with us and sharing your life's work and passion. It is important that we are not only aware of these issues, but we accurately label them. The Guardian newspaper recently updated its terms to more accurately describe the environmental crises facing our world. Climate change becomes climate crisis or climate emergency. The term global heating rather than warming now highlights the urgency that threatens our planet. Words matter in all serious issues, but this is what you have been telling us for decades. There may be only 160,000 Inuit people in the entire world, but you are the canary in the coal mine or the mercury in the climate change barometer. Today, you have focused our attention on the impact of global heating and its disproportionate effect on your people, the Inuit living in the north of Canada, people who are not responsible for this climate disaster in the first place. Your book educates us on the contaminants known as persistent organic pollutants that are traveling from the south to the north on the wind and water. 80% of the pollutants found in the Canadian Arctic come from outside Canada. They are affecting the Arctic wildlife, polar bears, seals, walrus, the country food diet of Inuit people. You have helped us see the essential relationship between the traditional way of living on the land and maintaining your culture and economic independence. This depends on the cold, the ice, and the frozen ground. This is an ethical and a spiritual proposition. If we take away your right to be cold, then we take away who you are, your tradition, your culture, livelihood, spirituality, and your identity. As a representative of the young generation, we are aware of this threat to your people and our own future. Being aware of the violation of God's magnificent and life-giving creation, we thank you for your courage, your perseverance, and your faithfulness. Moderator, we stand. As a pledge to not only keep learning, but to turn this knowledge into action and spread the word along the way. And we encourage the church to follow this path. Thank you.